listening to the sweet sounds of the After Movie Diner. Support us at patreon.com/After Movie Diner. Or I'll punch you in the teats. Rate and review us on iTunes, Earthling. And now, here's your host, Jon Cross.
Hello and welcome to another Sleazy Spader Springtime episode of the After Movie Diner. Let's cue the Sleazy Spader Springtime theme song. Oh, it's Sleazy Spader Springtime. Welcome to the show. Oh, it's a Sleazy Spader Springtime. I want you all to know that if you please, there's James Spader Sleaze and it's got nowhere else to go. So loosen all your blouses, give your nose a damn good blow. 'Cause now we're coming clean, oh yeah. It's 2019, Sleazy Spader Springtime Show. Oh yeah, it is 2019's Sleazy Spader Springtime Show. And on this episode, well, considering the film we're covering stars none other than the delightful, delectable, and delicious Michelle Pfeiffer, there was really no one else on the vastness of the internet that I could go to discuss 1994's Wolf. But Michael Campochiaro, who you will know as the cult classic written reviewer for the After Movie Diner, but also the owner of Words Out of Place online. And if anybody follows him on social media, knows he is the biggest Pfeiffer fan out there in the universe. Michael, it is a decided pleasure to have you back in the booths of the After Movie Diner.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be back.
And as I said, the film this time is Wolf from 1994. It's probably one of the most, in terms of Hollywood anyway, not necessarily all of filmmaking, but in terms of Hollywood, it's probably got the most starry and prestigious cast and crew of almost any Wolfman movie, I feel like, especially for the 90s. It's pretty insane who is in the film and who is behind the film.
Exactly. Yeah, these are not people that you would have expected to make a werewolf movie.
No, it is directed by none other than Mike Nichols, who is known for two things. Mainly, he's known for his Nichols and May double act, comedy double act, followed by a series of he sort of every film he touched became a classic in some way or other, and he is sort of very well known as the director of predominantly male and female relationship films. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, The Graduate, Carnal Knowledge, Silkwood, Heartburn, Postcards from the Edge, Working Girl. Most of them fall within the dramatic, slightly comedic film genre. He does do some out-and-out comedies, like What Planet Are You From and The Birdcage. He also has directed many stand-up comedy and live comedy documentaries. But not the resume one would assume would go into Wolf. Outside of the fact that he was a friend of Jack Nicholson, who'd been trying to get the movie made for quite some time, and the fact that Wolf does, to some extent, have human drama as its central concept.
Right, exactly. The interesting thing about this movie, I don't know if you want to segue into when I first saw it.
Yes, let's talk about sort of when you first came across it, yeah.
In 94 in the theater, I went with a friend, and I was a teenager, and I can remember him specifically pointing out, like, this is not a horror movie.
Right. Yeah.
And I was so invested in it for reasons you can imagine, and that I just got swept away with it. It was not what I expected going in, because this was back at the time where, you know, it wasn't as easy to find information on new films. You weren't hearing about them for 9 months on the internet.
Right, exactly.
Before they came out. So, I mean, I knew it was a Pfeiffer movie. I knew Nicholson was in it. And
back in the glory days, we call that, Michael. Back in the blissful days where we didn't have to endure 17 trailers edited by an ADD teenager having a spasm. Yeah.
So it was quickly apparent to me with the movie that it wasn't going to be The Howling, but it's not like going into it, that's what I thought anyway, you know?
Right.
So, because of course Mike Nichols is attached, and that was intriguing to me at the time too. I know some people that may have been a turnoff, you know, thinking he can't do horror, he wouldn't do horror, why would I watch this?
Yeah.
But I found that kind of intriguing. And then the movie itself kind of blew me away, and that's why I'm excited to be here to talk to you about it, because all these years I've loved it, I've rewatched it a million times, and I've often, beyond other Pfeiffer friends of mine, I haven't found that many people that I can kind of gush about this movie with.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people may have seen it and then they never saw it again, and I think it's the kind of movie that with repeat viewings just gets even richer, even better.
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, you know, going into it, and I'll quickly encapsulate the plot, and then we'll kind of get into it. Essentially, an aging but very well-renowned and well-respected book editor working for a major publisher in New York looks to be fighting his career as a young upstart, played by the Sleaze General himself, James Spader, portraying one of his delicious shits, as I like to call him. He is quite a, you know, foppish, hand-wringing, purse-lipped asshole in this movie, and he wrings. You can almost see Spader wringing every last drop of sweat and jism out of the role on screen. It's quite delightful. We'll get on to more of that later. But so a young upstart is coming after his job on a trip up to Vermont to try and sign a reclusive author. The editor gets hits what seems to be a wolf on the back roads of Vermont. When inspecting what he believes to be the dead animal, the animal comes back and bites him in the hand. It turns out obviously the wolf is a werewolf, and while fighting for his job and then finding out that the same grubby oik who's been coming after his job has also been laying his wife, Jack Nicholson declares all-out war on the publishing firm while also slowly turning into a werewolf. And meeting the now or new owner of the publishing company who is trying to fire him and replace him. His daughter, who's played by Christopher Plummer, playing Raymond Alden. His daughter, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, and Jack Nicholson's Will Randall, the editor, kind of get embroiled in a love affair while all this insanity is going on. It's sort of a metaphor for a whole bunch of stuff, but it's definitely what the most interesting way that it was explained in an interview / article that I read about the film was that in the 80s, predominantly, and very interestingly, the sort of 80s that James Spader comes out of, meaning the Brat Pack movies, Hollywood was incredibly focused on youth, even though, you know, most of the people in the Brat Pack movies playing teenagers were actually in their late 20s, early 30s. Hollywood was at least fixated with telling stories about youth. And as we got into the early 90s, Jack Nicholson and Mike Nichols especially, and writer Jim Harrison, who had been working with Nicholson for 12 years on the story and everything else, saw it as a way of age and experience overcoming youth. which is sort of an interesting way to look at it, with the wolf aspect being a kind of heavy-handed metaphor for the corporate game playing and shitty shenanigans you have to kind of get into to preserve both your career, but also fuck other people over on your way to preserving your career. So there's all that kind of going in, and it's why kind of Mike Nichols plays both the relationship drama and the machinations of Spader and the anger of Jack Nicholson, and indeed the humor which is dashed throughout this movie. They are all the strongest aspects of the film, and despite having the wonderful makeup work of renowned werewolf makeup effects artist Rick Baker, really it's the horror aspect, or the werewolf aspect, which is certainly with modern eyes the sort of the weaker part of the film. But we can as well get onto that. So you first saw this when it came out. You've always kind of loved it as you've watched it time and time again. It's got better and better. I felt like this viewing for me, because this is probably about my fifth or sixth time seeing the film, all the bits that Nicholson, Pfeiffer, and Spader excel at in their careers shine through the movie and make it better each time. And this was certainly my most enjoyable time viewing it. But I wanted to sort of put this out there. It's possibly the one movie, and I'm pretty much a fan of sort of auteur theory and one person guiding the ship, but it's one movie where, in order to be successful on both elements, you almost want a second director. Like if you had made this. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to put this out there. If you could imagine this as a Mike Nichols, John Carpenter co-directing film, Joe Dante maybe, because Dante has slightly more of the comedy, but I just think if you look at what it made me think of was Memoirs of an Invisible Man, which I've recently seen as well, which was Carpenter for hire, making a fairly bog standard script, set again within sort of a fairly bog standard yuppie world, but essentially it's a bit like Starman was. It's a romantic drama with a supernatural element. And I just thought, if you had taken Carpenter and put him with a script like this, which I think has far more interest in it for him, more so than Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and got him to knock the werewolf bits out and the horror bits out of the park, and got Nichols to work on the relationship comedic side, it would almost be one of the greatest movies ever made. You know what I mean?
That would be a great combination. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but when the werewolf aspect, which is funny because I don't believe they ever say werewolf in the movie. They say demon wolf or something. I don't know. The man that Nicholson visits at one point, I think, uses demon wolf.
In fact, Pfeiffer, mystic. When Pfeiffer is trying to get the handcuffs off him, only to put them back on him, in that sequence, she literally stops short of saying werewolf. She says, to stop you becoming, and then she goes, oh, I've got the handcuffs off. Like she stops in the middle of her sentence. It's almost like in Shaun of the Dead, where they don't want to say the zombie word because it's ridiculous. It's almost like if we say werewolf, that'll squarely plant this as a werewolf movie, and this actually isn't a werewolf movie. This is a human interest drama, comedy, romance, yuppie movie almost.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that final act where the werewolf elements kind of become more prominent is, in my estimation, probably the point where obviously Carpenter would have been able to really contribute. Yeah. So, yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, and there are other aspects as well. There's also several sequences that even by 94 seem incredibly, in terms of the werewolf stuff, seem incredibly trite and obvious. The most successful bits, I think, are the initial reaction of the horses to when Jack Nicholson shows up is like a really nice thing. It's sort of similar. I want to say like Coppola does a similar thing in Dracula. Am I right in that?
Yes, I think he does. I haven't seen that one in a while, and I've actually been meaning to watch it again. But yeah, I do remember that.
But it's always nice because it's sort of a subtle thing.
And that's a wonderful scene, that entire party scene.
Yeah.
And the way it then segues into him meeting Laura Alden, played by Pfeiffer. Just a great scene.
No, completely. And it's made even more crazy when you realize post-party that not only has Spader been nagging for Nicholson's job for weeks and weeks, according to Plummer, but also that he's been boning his wife.
Exactly.
It's really the two prongs of Spader's arsenal is that, you know, if you're going to get Spader in a film, you want him A, to be a bit of an oily shit, and B, to be a sleaze. And in this, he is just both barrels, and it's quite delightful and delicious. I mean, I could not. There's that one sequence after Nicholson finds out that he's been sleeping with his wife, and Nicholson goes into work the next day and confronts Spader in his office. Spader makes something like 17 ludicrous faces within a row, and each one is more delightful and delicious than the one before. It's an absolute masterclass in mugging, but Spader does it better than anybody.
One of my favorite parts is in the bathroom scene with Nicholson.
Yes.
When Nicholson marks his territory,
all over his suede shoes.
And the way Spader plays it when he goes to grab the paper towels, just the way he throws his leg up on the bench and pat, 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 pat. I think what does he say? These are suede or something like that. Yeah, he goes,
suede shoes. Good idea. Something like that.
And then storms out.
Because of course they're suede shoes. Because only Sleazy Spader would have like the sleaze creepers, the suede sleaze creepers of. But no, he's so well cast in this, and you know, I do think it must be for someone like Spader. I mean, yes, Spader's been in a bunch of stuff at this point. Obviously, 94. He's sort of 10 years into his main cinematic career, but to have, you know, Nichols behind the directors on the director's chair, and to have Nicholson and Pfeiffer in the same film, that has got to, and it clearly does, raise his game to the level of, you know, godlike status as far as his acting is in this film. I mean, this may be, I mean, I love Spader in lots of things, but this may be his best performance that out of all the Spader films that I've watched for Sleazy Spader Springtime. This might be, despite being the third lead, it might be the one that he nails almost perfectly.
Yes,
it's incredible.
I would agree. He's spot on in this.
Yeah. And, you know, they all are.
Oh, yeah.
We just interrupt the podcast for a quick advert. We do apologize about advertising. I know people find it annoying, but it is the nature of the beast. If we want to keep the hosting costs down, if we want to be able to pay for our yearly website subscription, and if we want to be able to keep bringing you the podcast, it is just something we have to put up with. So here is a 30-second ad for some gum for other. You don't need to pay attention to it. Just please listen to it, and the podcast will start quickly again afterwards. Thank you so much for being patient and tolerating these ads, as it is the best way for us to be compensated for what we're doing without having to constantly beg for money for you guys. However, if you want to support us, you can over at patreon.com/After Movie Diner. That's patreon.com/After Movie Diner. But what we'd rather you do is rate, review, share, comment, retweet, like, all those things. Please, it's absolutely free. It takes you but a second, and it helps immeasurably. So don't forget, rate, review, share, tweet, comment, retweet, like, all the rest of it. Please, please, please do that. Even if you think that you've already done it, keep doing it, because it really does help. The way that social media algorithms work now, nobody sees the post if I just post it in a vacuum. You really need to help us out. So please do that and let the adverts do the rest of the work. Thank you very much. 30 seconds and we'll be back on the air. Nicholson, you expect it from. I think. I don't think there's anything that Nicholson does in this that you're surprised by.
Right. It's a very subdued Nicholson too.
Right.
Because especially, I think at that point in his career, he'd already started to move into the hammier, showier territory. I don't know. I can't recall what else he was making around that time, but it is fairly subdued for him. And I remember at the time being kind of surprised by that, because I was at that point, I don't know if You Can't Handle the Truth was already out there, and I think it was.
It was. A Few Good Men came out in 92.
Yep. So shouting Nicholson was very popular.
Yeah, he'd already done the sort of the three roles that people kind of think of him as being kind of crazy, outside of sort of Easy Rider and some of his earlier stuff. He'd already done Witches of Eastwick. He'd already done Batman, and he'd already done A Few Good Men before this film comes out. It's interesting because after Wolf, he does a couple of subdued things. He does The Crossing Guard and Blood and Wine, where he's slightly more subdued. He goes back to being kind of parody Nicholson in Mars Attacks and As Good as It Gets. I mean, he's amazing in As Good as It Gets, but it's very much him dialed up to 11. Like, you almost expect him... It's funny because I kind of went into Wolf remembering the role that he plays as a book editor and someone fighting for his job and whatever. You almost expect him to be more like he is in As Good as It Gets. And actually, he never quite gets to that level of sort of... And I'm talking more about the first act of As Good as It Gets, where he's like full-blown Melvin Udall, just being kind of rude, sarcastic, but observational with everyone. You almost expect him to be that in this, and he, interestingly, isn't.
No, he's a little more. He's more almost resigned to the fact that his career is heading into the toilet, or at least it's not going to be. He's not going to be thought of in the same way, and he seems resigned to that fact early in the movie. And when they're at the party, and he gives that long monologue about what is he? Art is dead, or something to that effect, and now we have pop culture, and what else? I forget what else he says in the speech, but it's apparently something that Nichols. It's some tidbits that one of the writers of the film, I think it was Wesley Strick, kind of cobbled together things that Nichols himself had said in their time together. And then that kind of became the monologue that Nicholson gives there. And I think that's a great, like, early defining moment, in other words, for that character. I think it shows you that he's sort of over all of it. Yeah. He's like, like almost ready to say, forget this. This new world is not for me. But he's almost too... like you said, resigned to go that far. He's just sort of like, I'm going to play it out, but I'm not happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is this is, probably about, well, I mean, I got my first, and I mean, I was over in the UK, so it was slightly later on, but I got my first email around 96. Mm-hmm. So this is still pre-internet. It's obviously way before e-readers in that regard. And it's interesting because the character would almost be not obsolete, because I'm sure there's still an old boy network in book publishing or whatever, but publishing was about to get its biggest threat yet with the internet. And 10 years after this was made, or even 8 years after this was made, you couldn't really make this movie, because who would... I mean, you could change it. Originally, the character was meant to be a lawyer, so, I mean, you could go back to that. But, no one's going to be fighting for a head editor job in the early 2000s, because at that point, I'm not sure that anyone would quite give a shit in the way that they do in 1994. And that's just based on my friends who I know have been published, who say that it's, quite a shocking environment at this point.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's sort of an interesting role for Nicholson, because I'm not going to say that I sat there watching it this time going, oh, please be more shining.
Mm-hmm.
But there was that aspect of it where I'm like, even when he's either becoming the wolf or fighting the wolf, or like, because he spends a lot of the film, especially in the night sequences, sort of mid-wolf, mid-Nicholson. Like, he doesn't go full wolf till the very end, because of his amulet that he's being given by his convenient Indian Swami or whatever he is. I'm not sure, doctor or something. So even in those performances, I find the Nicholson aspect. I understand what he's trying to do, and I understand that he's trying to downplay it, and I understand that the job he has is that, Pfeiffer has to constantly keep saying what a good man he is and what a good heart he has. And if he plays it more like Nicholson would normally have played it, that would have been a much harder sell. But It does mean that as he becomes the wolf, you almost feel like he's holding back, and he's meant to be holding back, but at the same time, you kind of just want him to be Nicholson. You know what I mean? You kind of sit there watching the movie being like, just please pull out your, insane, wide-eyed Joker act or something just for 3 minutes in the movie. And he really doesn't. Even when he goes full wolf at the end, it's mostly, I'm not going to say realistic, but it's mostly how a confused, angry, but also a person who's trying to save the woman that he loves, a person would behave if they were becoming a wolf, if that makes any sense.
Right. No,
Meaning it's sort of played realistically, even though it's not a realistic situation.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think Spader goes more full Nicholson in this movie than Nicholson.
Yes, and actually, he, we know that Spader can walk on the dark side, and he's taken plenty of roles where he's looked at, really rather extreme and severe sides of human, both sexuality and psychology. But I don't know that we've ever seen Spader be quite so, like, brutally aggressive and brutally frank. Like the especially what the language becomes in the last sequence. It's totally in keeping with his character, but even in Spader's like sleaziest roles, we've not seen him say, things like "let me fuck you to death" in a way where it genuinely nails you to the back of your seat. Like, you're genuinely like, oh my fuck, that's disgusting. Right. Don't ever say that again. And it's really interesting because you do feel like Spader reaches a performance that he hasn't quite tapped before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, he's really on in this one. He seems completely plugged into the character, and he, like you said earlier, with his facial expressions, I think he just adds so much in the choices that he makes in this film to the part. And I mean, it's a well written character, but I think Spader just performs it like masterfully.
Well,
I could watch him just in this role forever.
The sequence, the sequence in the police station.
Yes.
That's a great scene. I mean, that whole sequence with Pfeiffer beforehand, and then when he goes in with Richard Jenkins, the cop, that whole scene. I mean, that alone would, and I watched Spader, a lot of different Spader films. A lot of the time we watch them with sort of half our tongue in our cheek because we're aware that he's like slumming it in a B movie, or we're aware that he's kind of like trying to do something unique in a film that can't quite sustain it. But the entire sequence of him in that police station and all the different moods that he brings to it, and just some of the outrageous things he does, like burying his head in Pfeiffer's crotch and sniffing up her entire body, and then the weird way that he's in the police office, almost whispering this insidious confession, and it's a masterstroke, and it's one of the few things where I'm like, how Spader has never even been nominated for an Oscar or
I know.
or a SAG award or whatever. I mean, maybe he has for like some of the TV stuff he's done, but
Probably.
because I think he did win an Emmy for The Practice and for Boston Legal, I think. But
I think so.
which is hilarious because in both those things he's an absolute parody of himself. I mean, like wonderful, hilarious, but like an absolute parody. And whereas in this, especially the police role, you know, he is. I put him and Pfeiffer's performance in this above Nicholson's very easily.
Yes.
And Pfeiffer's because she's, and we can move on to talking about Pfeiffer, but like Pfeiffer because she's working with what admittedly was a damsel in distress role. Mm-hmm. It was meant to be the spoilt daughter of a rich guy who never gets her just attention, so therefore she, you know, tries to flout his authority at every move.
Yeah.
And then at the end, she's meant to be the damsel in distress. And there was talk about rewriting the script. Pfeiffer had initially said she didn't really want to do it. Mm-hmm. And there was talk about rewriting the script to make it a more complex and interesting role. That never actually happens. And she ends up taking the role anyway, just as an opportunity to kind of work with the cast and work with the director. And so, given that there's nothing on the page to make her a complex character, the fact that Pfeiffer... and the other thing is Pfeiffer's role has completely got to sell the romance and love affair, because I'm not sure that, you know, when Nicholson says, you know, I've never loved anyone like I love you, the only reason you kind of even buy that at all is Pfeiffer. It's not because of anything that Nicholson's done, and not because there's anything in the script that's been particularly, you know, sparky back and forth, or, you know, it's really down to the fact that Pfeiffer pulls the chemistry between her and Nicholson out of her performance, and does all the heavy lifting that really sells any of that, really.
Right. And I've always, because in those early scenes when they're together, like when they have the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, you watch a scene like that and think, well, my God, why would she ever end up with this guy? Because he gives that another monologue about, you know, how he has her pegged, because what does he say here? Yes, you know, I think I understand what you're like now. You're very beautiful. You think men are only interested in you because you're beautiful. You want them to be interested in you because you're you. The problem is, aside from all that beauty, you're not very interesting. And then he goes on and on.
Oh yeah, and then he brings it around and says, which, you know, the irony of which is, the only reason people therefore are interested in you is because you're beautiful. Yeah.
Right. And in an odd way, you're your own problem. Yeah.
Right. Which is it's a great soliloquy, but unfortunately it doesn't apply to Pfeiffer, because there's clearly way more to Pfeiffer than, it's almost a soliloquy you could write about an arrogant man's opinion of empty women. And it's wonderful the way Nicholson delivers it. But it doesn't apply to Pfeiffer because there's so many layers to Pfeiffer.
But it gives her one of her great lines in which she responds with, "Sorry, wrong line. I'm not taken aback by your keen insight and suddenly challenged by you." That's a great line. And probably one of the ones Elaine May wrote, because Elaine May came in and apparently beefed up some of the Laura Alden part for Nichols.
So there was a script written initially by... what's his name? Jim Harrison.
Yes, who seems like a wild man.
Yeah, Jim Harrison, who's a very good friend of Jack Nicholson, as is Mike Nichols. So and Jack Nicholson said, "Look, it's either you or Stanley Kubrick. Stanley's turned it down, so I'm going to vie for you. The studio will kind of let me pick my director because I brought the script to the studio." Jim Harrison wrote it 5 times over. Wesley Strick came in to kind of, because Harrison had a falling out with Nichols and kind of left. Yep. Wesley Strick came in to rewrite it and gets a co-writing credit on it, and then Elaine May does the sort of final punch-up on the script, I think adding more to both Pfeiffer's character, but also any of the kind of witty back and forth between Pfeiffer and Nicholson.
Yeah, which are some of my favorite scenes in the film. they're really great verbal sparring partners. But back to what you were saying, I agree. I think she sells that relationship, and I always saw it because at first, probably the first time I saw it, there was that question of like, well, why would she end up going to bed with this guy? And she says he's a good man. I mean, we know he's a good man, but we also know he's kind of, he can be a dick.
Yeah.
And I think that I've always rationalized that, like, the movie kind of escalates fairly quickly in their relationship. They seem to be like two people who met under these sort of immediate circumstances. There's a lot going on in his life. Things are changing. Everything seems to be spinning out of control. She senses that. She makes some comment about, I think, helping wounded animals. So she clearly has a history with doing that. So I see that as why they end up together. I'm not sure. It's not the kind of thing that would last in my mind, but it's the kind of thing that in that immediacy, it would seem right that they would cling to each other,
Yeah, and unfortunately, sort of the movie gives you, enough pieces to put the puzzle together, but I'm not quite sure how satisfying the puzzle is. Meaning, the difficulty is we're meant to meet Nicholson's character, feel like he enjoys his job, is good at his job, loves his wife, has many proteges where he works, because there's David Hyde Pierce, there's James Spader, there's a couple of people who kind of look up to him. But it's why when he's at that party and they have him making this kind of very cynical comment about pop culture, which certainly plays into what Plummer says to him later, that you're a person of great taste and integrity, and I don't need either of those things, or whatever it is.
Plummer's great in this too.
Yeah, Plummer's excellent. But him being sort of, I guess, anti-pop culture, I know why that's in there, and I understand like how that plays into his character, but it doesn't necessarily play into what I think he's meant to be at the beginning of the movie, which is a sort of friendly, gregarious, but essentially not ruthless enough person. But I think because we know Nicholson to be able to play ruthlessness in his sleep, it's very difficult to sell him as just sort of a mild-mannered, middle-aged, schlubby book editor who's, yes, very charming, but also doesn't have fight left in him, essentially.
Right.
Because I don't buy that for a second. And then the resolution of the job aspect of it is him literally saying, well, I'm going to call my author friends and get them to go to other publishing houses, and then I'm going to put a press release out saying that this current firm is terrible. And Christopher Plummer goes, well, in that case, I'm going to give you the keys to the entire kingdom, all the money you ask for, power over James Spader and everything else, all within one swift move. And you're kind of like, well, that doesn't really, like, that's not a fight that he had to have. And that's not even him getting his mojo back. That just seems to me fairly obvious. And yet the wolf is meant to be him getting his mojo back. Right. So it's sort of... And I think it's difficult that he gets bitten at the beginning of the movie, because it means that he finds out about his wife's infidelity after he's already got his mojo back. Because he gets his mojo back, him and his wife sort of make love and have this day where he sleeps all day, and then they eat, and then they make love, and everything's great. After he's already becoming the wolf, and after he's already kind of going through the change, he then finds out that she's cheating on him. Whereas it would almost be better if he lost everything while he was just a guy and then got bitten, and it was... Do you know what I mean? Then that would play more into... If the wolf is him getting his mojo back, or the wolf allows him to get his mojo back, it makes more sense for it to happen post-downturn. And it's very,
Right.
the first act of the movie has a lot to cover because we've got to meet the guy. We've got to establish his entire life. He's then got to lose his entire life. And then he's got to, like, get it back. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's why sort of the first hour of the movie is so compelling. And the second hour of the movie is sort of a little lost. Because it then becomes this other movie where it's like, unbeknownst to everyone, there are really two wolves. And one wolf has been going around murdering people in order to get his job back, being James Spader.
Right.
But the police are going to expect that it's Jack Nicholson, and then Pfeiffer doesn't really know who it is until the last minute. And so, like, the second half of the movie becomes a whole other thing. And that's kind of where you needed someone like a Carpenter to take the reins and go, right, instead of making this an hour second half, let's make this a strong 40 minutes, and let's just ramp up the violence, ramp up the excitement, ramp up the sex appeal, and let's just get this, done. Wolf has this notorious third act reshoot story. No one can decide whether they reshot the entirety of the third act or just one scene where Jack Nicholson leaps out of his cage towards the end. But it does feel like that entire sequence from Spader running down the guard to the entire fight to even the ending with Pfeiffer, that all feels like someone else made it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think so?
Yeah, that all feels like some second unit director took over and was like, well, now let me kill the guard and have him run over the body and have blood spurt everywhere, and let's get Rick Baker in here to actually make these guys look like wolves rather than just having slightly hairy sideburns. Like, let's put ears and teeth and hair, long nails, and like that's where it goes. Because the studio clearly watched the movie and were like, this is meant to be a werewolf picture. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the cigar chomping studio executive was like, come on, Nichols, you sold me this on a werewolf picture with Jack Nicholson. Instead, I got these two characters making moony eyes at each other the whole goddamn time. Where's my wolf fight? That's
Yes.
That's clearly what happened. I mean, that's almost word for word what was said.
The nice thing about the final part of the film for me has always, as a Pfeiffer fan though, has been that I like how the perspectives kind of shifts to her in that portion of the film. And it's almost like at times she's almost like the audience surrogate. And then, but overall it's like we're starting to see things through her eyes as opposed to through Nicholson's at that point. And then of course it all goes crazy with the fight between Nicholson and Spader. But I like the like we talked about earlier with the police scene and everything, and the way she's working. You can see that's where her performance comes in. It's brilliant, and you can see her working through it all in her head without really having to verbalize much of it.
Of course,
And
like throughout the film, she takes decisions that in anybody else's hands would be, oh, this is the petulant daughter role that never grew up, or this is the woman who's, flirty and sexual and just sleeps with any guy who will anger her father, or this is the woman who at one point is going to be like sexually flirty with Spader and then absolutely terrified. She takes all this stuff and she actually makes it about an empowered woman surrounded by, middle-class, middle-aged, wealthy, white, flabby guys.
Condescending. Exactly.
Condescending guys who all want something from her in one degree or another. She knows all of these types. She knows the Nicholson type. She knows the Spader type. She knows her father's type. She knows all this. And she's had to deal with it her whole life. And all that comes from Pfeiffer.
Yep.
Like the
Absolutely.
way she plays Spader in the police sequence where he thinks he's playing her and she's as equally playing him, that comes from a woman who knows, like that doesn't shine to me as someone just thinking quick on her feet. That's a woman who's like, oh, fuck, this guy again. I've had to deal with sleazy fuckers at my father's firm coming on to me for 10 years since I was of age. Okay, I'll play nice, but then I'll slip out the back door when they're not watching because fuck those guys, like, you know what I mean? And she plays it that way.
She does.
And that's Pfeiffer. That's not even on the page. That's just how she plays it, and it's incredible. It makes it an empowered central performance of a strong female rather than anything that's intended in the script. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. That's why it's definitely one of my favorite, definitely top 10 performances of hers, because she does so much with so little in this movie. It's just a delight to watch her in this one. She just inhabits the character so beautifully, so naturally. Yeah. And like you said, that you described it perfectly. She knows all of these types, and you see it just from her reactions, whether they're silent reactions or verbal, but you see it in her performance and the way she reacts to Spader, Nicholson, her father, everybody else. And it's just magnificent.
It's missing one scene, because I think when she meets Nicholson and he is the way he is with her, she assumes that she knows him and who he is. And then later in the film, she seems to have realized he's a good person with a kind heart that she might actually want to be with, and this could actually be the love that she's been looking for.
Right.
And they're missing the scene between the two. They're missing the scene where she sees in him what she says she sees in him later on. Because as an audience member, I'm not sure I ever see that in him. And I don't know whether that's just Nicholson's performance or whether that is the fact that there isn't that scene in there.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. And it is something that I've noticed before, too, that I've felt myself wanting to see in Nicholson's performance, but it's just not there. And, I mean, I don't think... It just popped into my head just because Pfeiffer's worked with him a few times as well. Al Pacino. I don't know that this would have been a great role for him, but at the same time, just in the scenes we're talking about here, I'm not even going to picture Al Pacino as a werewolf.
Right.
But in these scenes,
well, just look at Al Pacino now. Just look at some of the pictures of Al Pacino with his beard and his hair all over the place.
And the wild hair.
Yeah, that's exactly what it would be.
So those scenes, like we're talking about, whether that extra scene is ever written or not, but just those early scenes between the two characters, I could imagine him conveying these things through his eyes, through his expressions, through the way he delivers lines. Nicholson, that the way he underplays the whole thing is at times, I think it almost veers into, I don't want to say that he's not present, but it almost seems like he's not at times. And
right, definitely.
He's underplaying it so much that he's almost like disappearing at times. And there's a great moment when he talks to himself in the mirror in the hotel about the line about hair club for men.
Yeah.
And you can see that little spark of Nicholson in that moment, but it's real brief.
Well, I think it suffers a little bit from what maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think it was Stephen King. One of the reasons why he objected so much to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was the casting of Nicholson.
Yeah, he did.
And I think he said something about, like, because when you meet Nicholson at the beginning, you know he's going crazy. Like, there's no surprise there to you. Because even when he's...
you know he's crazy from the minute you see him. Yeah.
Right. Even when he's, buttoned down, tweed blazer, going to the job interview at the Overlook Hotel at the beginning, you're already like, wow, Nicholson's a whack job.
Yeah, you're like, this guy's totally unhinged. Absolutely, in that interview. I'm just like...
It almost needs to be Anthony Edwards or someone who's very milquetoast, like very... I don't know why I picked on him. I just always think of him as sort of very true blue and decent and honest. It needs to be someone... Like, I think the difficulty is with Wolf and The Shining, Nicholson sort of put Wolf together, so it's difficult to really say that he was cast because he brought it to everyone else. But the problem with it is that while he might be fine as the Wolf and why he might be fine as Jack Torrance once Jack Torrance goes crazy, you don't buy the transition because of who he is.
Right.
You almost need to cast against the wolf or cast against the crazy Jack Torrance and have an actor push themselves.
Right.
Because it's far more scary when Spader makes the leap.
Yeah.
In the film.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, he's terrifying at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, okay, that's because he embraces the wolf and Jack is trying to fight it the whole time. But I don't see this. The trouble is with Nicholson is he doesn't have kind eyes.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
It's problematic. It's not that he's not a good actor; he just doesn't have kind eyes.
That's why I thought of Pacino, because he does. But yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, you've got to have Pfeiffer looking into those eyes and seeing, and we the audience need to know what she's seeing without her saying it.
Right.
And the problem is we don't. And I think that as excuse the pun here, but as howlingly bad as some of the wolf sequences are, and they are pretty shoddy. The one in particular, which is shot day for night, so badly that I'm like, it looks like it took place midday, and I'm like, if you can't shoot it at night, don't shoot it at
kills
all.
The deer, I think.
Yeah, when he kills the deer, it's so. I mean, forget about the laughable leaping and the horrendous stunt double, but the fact that it's shot clearly in the middle of the afternoon. Yeah. The only way to do day for night effectively, and day for night is one of the few old film techniques I'm so glad went out with modern filmmaking. Everything else I wish they'd bring back. I wish they'd bring back animatronics and puppets and blue screen and back projection and models and sets and matte paintings. I wish they'd bring all that back, but never bring back day for night because it's never successfully done particularly. But if you're going to try and successfully do it, the only way to do it is don't shoot the sky in the same shot. Like you could have shot the forest day for night and it would have been fine, but showing vast swathes of the blue sky with white clouds in it, you're like, well, yeah, it doesn't really work. And in fact, weirdly, we just watched Fistful of Dollars this evening before I got on the phone with you, and there's another entire sequence where they go to the graveyard and that's shot day for night, and Sergio Leone is shooting the entire expanse of the sky, and I'm like, I'm sorry, this is clearly like mid-afternoon on a hot day in Spain. This is not, in anyone's opinion, either dusk, dawn, or the middle of the night. It's just a failed technique. That doesn't really work. But no, sorry. Outside of, as I was saying, the howlingly bad wolf sequences that somewhat limit the film having as much of a cult fandom as it should have. The other thing that I think is problematic is Nicholson to some extent, and I hate to say that because I absolutely love Nicholson, and there's nothing wrong with Nicholson per se. It's just you kind of wish anyone other than that had been cast, just because it would have been really fun to have seen. I don't believe Jack's struggling to be the wolf. I think Jack's struggling to be a normal human being. I believe that he is the wolf. I think he's struggling to be.
Right. So right off the bat, he's at a disadvantage because because
And I think so. There's something that the scriptwriter Jim Harrison said about the biggest problem he had with Mike Nichols is he uses a Greek reference, the Apollonian and Dionysian expression.
Yes, he pictured
But for people who are not versed in either Greek mythology or the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, who also references this, essentially what he's talking about the brain versus the heart, essentially. Logic and rational thinking versus dancing and freaking out and craziness and enjoyment. it's very, very clear from the film that Nichols won out, and that
Right.
it focuses far more on the psychology of the whole situation than it does on the beast, freak, dance, crazy side of the situation.
Right. Like a movie like The Howling handles some of that. And with the colony, with the folks at the colony who turn into werewolves, and talk about
I mean,
the way that they embrace the beast and things like that. But yeah, that's not really a part of this movie, even though Spader's character does.
right. I mean, in terms of werewolf pictures, and certainly contemporary werewolf pictures, both American Werewolf in London and The Howling, which have to stand atop some of the two of the greatest werewolf pictures. But those two movies do the story of a mild man becoming a werewolf and dealing with that, or a mild person ended up being surrounded by werewolves, or whatever it is,
Right.
or the psychology of it, or the metaphor of it, or the emotion of it, or the whatever. Both those films deal with it way better than this movie does. However, what this movie succeeds in the like I said before, the character, the emotion, the
Exactly.
drama, the comedy.
Yeah, I rarely even think of it as a werewolf movie.
Right, and it's almost
really not.
yeah.
So, yeah.
But I wonder, I do wonder, like I said, if you had pulled in a Wes Craven or a John Carpenter, and I'm only saying Wes Craven or John Carpenter versus Dante and Landis, because I think Dante and Landis have too much of a sort of impish humor to them. I think
absolutely.
what this movie needed was the wolf sequences need to be as straight-faced, believable, violent, and scary as the regular sequences are funny, dramatic, engaging, and whatever. Like, it needs that harsh compliment to the rest of the movie, and it doesn't have it. So what it ends up happening is every wolf sequence, you're either watching it going, oh, God, I wish you'd filmed this better, or you're watching it, like, out and out laughing, which I know a lot of people do. Like, when Nicholson's, character starts leaping around the place,
Right.
people do tend to laugh. The only sequence that sort of genuinely, like, gets a jump is, I think, when he goes to see Spader and discovers Spader's with his wife, and he, like, turns around and bites
Right.
Spader. That's really the only bit where you're like, whoa, okay. That's really the only jump scare in it until the very end.
Yeah. I've always loved the score is spectacular.
Oh, right. Yes. Ennio Morricone's score.
Yeah.
His description of the movie is the other. So there's the description of, like, old finally getting it over on the young, which I love. But the other description is him saying, well, I wrote the music. Everyone who worked on this movie had a different idea about what this movie was, which I love. But what was
That's
his...
why it's so fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. What his phrase was, a man fighting being in a dream, or a man going through a dream or something? What was his...
Oh, yes. Yeah, I have read that. Yeah. Yep. Something about a dream. Yeah.
Because I thought that was the other great quote about it.
Yeah, I mean, I like the homages, too, to the classic kind of Wolfman movies. And there's an elegance to the movie that I just really get into, and which is established kind of early on at the party scene. But it's the sort of movie in those scenes where I just kind of want to live in it, and it's like, these are people that in real life I would probably hate, but
yeah.
In the context of the film, it's just it's so elegant at times. Even like the dissolves from scene to scene, I just find it all sort of dreamlike, and there's that dreamlike quality to it with Nicholson sleeping and being exhausted at the beginning, and then things seem to ramp up. But I've always liked that feel to the film too. There's something about it that feels kind of like this is the point I had wanted to mention. I feel like the movie feels timeless, even though it's referencing a lot of classic werewolf horror monster movies, and it was made in the 90s, but I don't feel like there are obviously 90s signifiers in the movie, whether it's the clothing or what have you, or like we talked about the publishing industry right before the internet age. But I still feel like the movie overall it still works pretty well in terms of it not seeming tied to any particular date or time period, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, no, completely.
It feels sort of just, classic.
I do love, so this is one quote that Jim Harrison said, "I wanted Dionysian, but he wanted Apollonian. He took my wolf and made it into a chihuahua. I cracked up for 10 minutes and then went out into the country and stood in front of a wolf den and apologized while my dog hid under the truck." I have no idea what that means, but
that's a great quote.
It is a great quote.
He's on there's pretty great special features on the Indicator Blu-ray that came out, I want to say, a year and a half ago, maybe.
Do you have that?
I do, yeah.
Oh, you're lucky.
There's this spectacular booklet with...
there's a making of as well, right, which I found the first 3 minutes of, but I hadn't.
Yep, and there's just... I mean, everyone that involved in the featurette is just extremely candid, and it's like you said earlier, everybody had a different idea what this movie was about, and they're all talking about that. Whether it's Wesley Strick or the producer, is it, I forget his name. Is it Wick? Douglas Wick?
It might be.
And Rick Baker is interviewed too. And,
Douglas Wick is the producer, yes.
Yeah, and then there are little interview snippets with the main players like Pfeiffer and Spader and Jim Harrison is one of them, and he's I don't know where they filmed it, but he looks like he's out in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And the quote you just read is absolutely indicative of the way the guy talks. And apparently, I mean, the whole idea for this came because he had written, I believe he'd written a novel called Wolf back in the 70s.
I believe so, yeah.
But
it was definitely a novel first, I think, yeah.
Yeah, but it was, I think, based on the experience that he had where he woke up in a fever dream state one night and believed he was turning into a wolf. And that sparked the idea for the novel. And then here we are with the film, which is absolutely nothing like the novel.
No.
But yeah, there's a whole series of fascinating characters involved with this.
Yeah, it's one of those, weirdly enough, when you read like how it was put together and who it was put together by, never before has all of those things resulted in a film that like directly reflects all of those conflicts.
Right, yes.
Like the movie is completely a reflection of almost everyone who is writing it.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, having Morricone do the score, you know, Nichols direct it, Nicholson star in it. It's, you know, it's so filled with incredible kind of historic talent and
yes. A-list talent.
Yeah, and sort of at a certain point, the people who were kind of running Hollywood almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost the only movie that I want to go back and just reshoot like a third of it,
right?
With a different director, and add lots of. You know, I know what they were trying to do, but I was, if you're making a movie in which, like, at parts, your hero, like, bounds around the place killing deer and biting the fingers off gangbangers, I want arterial spray splashing up onto walls and I want I want Nicholson in like full, mad prosthetics with a big twitching nose and mad ears and crazy hair and gnarling teeth, and that's really what I want throughout the whole thing. But I mean, if you go into, I'll say this: if you go into the film knowing that it's not a werewolf film, but rather a kind of a wry satirical comedic drama with werewolf elements, if that's even a thing.
It is in this movie.
Then I think you'll get a lot more joy out of it. That and watching...
I agree.
Yeah, that and watching Pfeiffer take a nothing role and make it one of the most important in the film, and Spader taking probably the most delicious role in the film and adding so many dollops of, like... cream and sugar and hot sauce and to the pudding, and just splashing about in that thing.
There's so much to enjoy about the movie.
Yeah.
For as much as I know horror, I know some horror fans who want nothing to do with it, and it's like you just described. If you don't go into it thinking of it as a horror film, but as more of a human interest story, a story about aging and male ego and all these kind of fascinating things, and then the werewolf elements just sort of add, like we talked about earlier, the metaphoric aspects.
Yeah. Well, I've never
It's a hoot. It's
great. Yeah, and there's some really funny bits in it as well.
Oh, yeah.
There's just some really funny bits in it that I love as well, and some
even
lines
like
in it.
I love the sort of low key interactions between Nicholson and David Hyde Pierce.
Yeah,
at the publishing house, just they're pitch perfect.
Well, Hyde Pierce and the woman who plays Nicholson's secretary in the film,
yes, whose name escapes me, but. And also, this movie stars Kate Nelligan. I'm a big fan of hers, and she
Eileen Atkins.
Oh, okay.
Is his, and she, like, you don't need to do too much to establish the film because of the work that her and Hyde Pierce do. Yeah. You understand what his day to day is like because of those two people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a weird cameo by Prunella Scales as a kind of ditzy Irish author, which is interesting because, unlike a Judi Dench and unlike a Helen Mirren or a Maggie Smith, Prunella Scales in the UK, certainly in terms of theatre and TV work, is up there with those actresses. You could count her alongside a Mirren or alongside a Judi Dench or alongside a Maggie Smith. And obviously is most famous probably for her role on Fawlty Towers as John Cleese's wife in that series.
Yeah.
But never really did the American or even British film career in the way that those other three actresses did. As a UK guy, I'm like, oh, wow, it's Prunella Scales. Like, I'm aware of her. But I think as Americans, very odd that she would just be plucked out. Now, I know that Nichols... is friendly with Monty Python. I know that he's friendly with John Cleese and Eric Idle and so maybe that's where that came from. I don't know. Maybe he's a bit of an Anglophile. I don't know. There's an interesting connection. There's an interesting Spader connection with this movie, which is that Pfeiffer, who during this movie married
David E. Kelly.
And Michelle Pfeiffer and James Spader, who, despite the nature of their performance on screen, remained great friends outside of the film.
Yeah.
And when The Practice came about and they were looking to cast the Alan Shaw character, it was Pfeiffer who suggested Spader to E. Kelly. So in a weird way, without Wolf, we do not get, what is it, one series of The Practice and 5 series of Boston Legal. We don't get parody Spader, but still watchable Spader. You know, Blacklist is parody Spader, but it's sort of past watchable. Whereas in Boston Legal and The Practice, he's still very much watchable. And we don't get that without Pfeiffer and this film. So that's
Right.
like, I always think that's fascinating.
It is, yeah.
Also, what kind of dinner conversations do Pfeiffer and Spader have? I can't even imagine. You know what I mean?
I know.
Some wild times around the Kelly household, clearly.
I'm sure.
I'm endlessly fascinated by Spader. It was like when he was on the Tonight Show, because once he never really did a lot of interviews, and then once he got the blacklist, he kind of had to be trotted out on every show, sort of every time a new season came out. And I think it kind of appalled him a little bit. But like you Google or YouTube Spader interviews, and it's all stuff from like the Today Show and Good Morning America and stuff where you're like, Spader doesn't belong in people's homes this early in the day. Al Roker shouldn't be talking to James Spader. That's just weird.
Yeah.
But when he tells stories about like hanging out with the young Kennedys and getting high and throwing up in front of Jackie Onassis. But then, years later, finding out that also he hung out with like Robert Downey Jr., who he's a very great friend of, still to this day, and it's kind of how he got into Ultron. And the fact that he's like hung out at Pfeiffer and Kelly's house. To be a fly on the wall of like Spader's life outside of movies, I almost feel like Spader's more interesting off the screen than he is on the screen.
I think so, yeah.
I just want Spader to like. I don't necessarily want him to write if he writes an autobiography, he has to narrate it so that I can have the audiobook of him.
Yeah, you need the audiobook of that one.
Slithering and slurring through every possible sexual conquest he's ever had.
In his little interview feature on the Blu-ray extras, he's sitting in his chair with one arm over the back of the chair, shirt kind of unbuttoned. He's like he's like kind of sitting at an angle, talking. He's so into it.
He's so loose.
He's so expressive. So yes.
He's just wonderfully loose. He doesn't sit in chairs so much as drape himself over them.
Exactly. That's what he's doing.
So I find that endlessly fascinating. I also know that, like, for example, he's almost entirely blind and suffers from like crippling anxiety. So while he has this sort of one side of his personality, he also has this other like bizarre. God, I want to be Spader's friend so bad.
I know it would be great.
I want him to hear these podcasts and realize that there's someone out there that cherishes.
Let's get it out there.
I have written to his publicist and his manager several times and say, hey, we do this series, and although it does have a tongue-in-cheek nature, we are genuine fans of his work, and I think he would appreciate the humor and would really appreciate a conversation. Please do get in touch, and it's never happened. But one day, maybe, who knows?
One day.
I got Peter Weller
you did.
a couple of years after we finished doing the Woods and Weller series, so who knows? But Wolf is fantastic. It's fantastic for the Spader. It's fantastic for the Pfeiffer. And despite its... and to your point about horror movie fans, being someone who, because he runs a movie website, is on a lot of different groups, and because he does like horror films in general, as one of the genres he likes, I am on a lot of like horror groups or horror conventions or horror blogs or whatever. And I'm always sort of fascinated by the people who, and I don't want to stereotype anyone, but the people who are sort of claim to only be into horror films. And I don't mean as an affectation, but genuinely the only thing they watch is horror films. Because... and therefore they would watch Wolf and condemn it because it wasn't enough of a horror film. And that's when I was saying that I thought that the horror elements of the film should be more horrific. I genuinely mean that, but I meant it more as a way to both complement and highlight and support the plot that's already happening. I don't want to change any of the drama or the story or anything like that to just make it a horror film. I just think what lets the drama and the emotion and the sexuality and all that other stuff down in the film is the horror bits, and I just think they need to be punched up a bit. But someone
Yeah.
watching this and denouncing it because it's not a horror film is sort of vastly missing the point. And I don't understand people who sort of only have that interest,
Right.
because, you know, I grew up a comedy nerd who was squeamish and couldn't even watch the live organ transplant in Monty Python's Meaning of Life. I had to fast forward it because even though it was comedy and it was people I liked, the gore turned my stomach. And then at a certain point, you grow out of that, and I could end up watching anything. But the idea of only being into kind of one genre, you know, kind of is baffling to me.
Me too.
Not that I go out of my way to be eclectic, but it just that if you sit and watch Wolf and go, well, that's a shitty horror movie, and kind of condemn it on that basis, then I don't see that as a reasonable criticism of this film, because it's not even claiming to be a horror film at a certain
Right.
point.
Could completely agree with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm in a few groups, and I'm always kind of confused by that too. I mean, I'm thrilled that people, because I'm also a horror nut, and I'm thrilled that people love it enough to, you know, want to promote only horror, because horror is often overlooked or looked down upon, I should say,
Right.
outside of circles like ours. But it does mystify me that certain people only watch horror, just because there are so many, like, there's elements in horror movies that you can find in other genres too, even.
Right.
And so it just kind of amazes me that you wouldn't segue into something else like that. But
Right. Well, I
and
mean, there's
also,
crossovers with detective films, with thrillers, with action films, with, you know, and I.
Well, the worst thing in the internet age as a horror fan is having to, like, read people arguing about whether or not a movie is a horror movie.
Oh yeah,
That makes me want to throw up.
Yeah.
Like, I was in a group once, and I don't know what was going on, and Green Room got brought up.
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of that movie. And then, but the whole conversation, instead of people started out, they were praising the movie, and we were discussing it and going back and forth. It was a productive conversation. And then, of course, some idiot chimed in that it's not a horror movie, which then led to everybody arguing about that for, like, the rest of the comments.
Yeah.
It's so tedious. I can't think of anything I'd rather do less than argue
Right.
with people about whether something is horror or not. To me,
Right.
I don't even understand their definitions of horror, way they, so.
And it's, I mean, not only that, but like horror has so many damn subgenres.
Exactly.
That it's sort of one of the most broad-ranging genres in general anyway, because it has, you know, there are monster movies that are not scary, but they would be counted as horror because they have a monster in them.
Right.
You know, there's also the fact that while a lot of people, and I agree with you, they champion horror because it's often a maligned genre or a misunderstood genre or a considered by Hollywood, quote unquote, as a secondary genre. I actually champion multiple genres because of that fact. I champion certain action films that are looked down upon. I champion the African American filmmaking from the 70s that is often looked down upon. I champion monster movies. I champion the Corman race car movies of the 60s or whatever. Like anything that, you know, someone would dismiss because, you know, it was either released by a B-movie producer or starred, you know, cult actors, or, you know, it's why I love your cult classic series for the diner, because, you know, and why I love Jim's Hammer Horror series for the diner. It's because those movies, more often than not, I mean, I just watched Turkey Shoot the other day, but the Brian Trenchard Smith movie, but those movies, more often than not, despite all their excessive and exploitation elements, often have way more to say about society and way more to say about humanity than the so-called kitchen sink dramas where everyone just stands around looking miserable and staring out of windows. And I'm like, that doesn't represent humanity to me. It doesn't represent my fears, doesn't represent my hopes, doesn't represent my, you know, panics or my loves or my whatever. What does is very often either genre-bending movies like Wolf or a lot of Carpenter's films, which can often fit into 2 or 3 different genres.
Right.
Or out-and-out exploitation films like Turkey Shoot, which features a werewolf wearing a top hat.
I'm gonna have to see this.
Biting a guy's toe off. But it also very closely, and look, it takes a lot of stuff from The Most Dangerous Game and from Orwell's 1984 and from Animal Farm and from Camp on Blood Island and various other things that it's definitely poaching from and acknowledging. But it is, when I watched it, I had this interesting brief discussion online about the whole, like, first of all, my thought was like, why don't we make exploitation movies anymore in a period of cultural turmoil like we're in the middle of? Back in the 70s, back in the 60s, back in the 80s even, we made outlandish exploitation movies to kind of talk about it. We don't anymore. And then someone pointed out, you can't anymore because if you even wrote... you can't exaggerate reality anymore because reality is already exaggerated to the point of satire doesn't work anymore. You can't, because if you went, in 50 years in the future, we have a maniacal despot that chains up foreign kids in cages. You're like, well, actually, we're living in that right now. Like, there is no satire to be made of that because however horrific your being, whether it would be, war crimes, Guantanamo, the Build the Wall crowd, whatever it is, like there's so many things that have happened in the last, 20 years that you can't really do a futuristic satire where the world is terrible because we sort of live in that situation now. Like 1984 has been and gone so many times. I don't even like the world 1984 represents is so we're so far beyond that now in terms of hideous. If Facebook tracking our every fart isn't the thought police, then I don't know what is. So
exactly,
it's sort of crazy. Anyway, I don't know why we got off on this tangent, but only because I'm fascinated by genre films and exploitation films and what they say about society way more than the so-called message. In fact, if there's any genre that I'm not likely to watch outside of fantasy films, which I find a little... I like some fantasy, but a lot of fantasy just seems to be silly named people going from silly named place to silly named place, trying to dispose of and or get a MacGuffin that I cannot feel any interest in. Outside of that, the only genre that I out and out despise is message movies, is serious, searing drama. Like Schindler's List, I couldn't, like, I mean, I've watched it, it's very well made, etc., it's very well acted, etc., but I have zero interest in, I do not understand the need to make that film, we get it. And I'm not saying we get it, there was a Holocaust, move on. I'm just saying I would rather watch a documentary on it than watch some... movie that's trying to manipulate my emotions about something that really happened. And so sort of earnest message movies. Dr. Action always points to that movie that they weirdly enough just remade with Bryan Cranston and what's his name?
Oh, is it Kevin Hart?
Kevin Hart.
No.
Which is the movie where you're like, oh my God, really? A poor black man who can't see his children has to help a rich white cripple learn the true meaning of life and joy and everything. You're just like, no, okay, at this point, like,
I know, you're like, we're still making these movies.
Yeah, there's so much wrong. And not only that, but the first time that was made, it was made in French, which just adds a whole extra level of pretension to it. I'm just, anything like that, I'm like, all right, shoot me in the face. I have no time for it.
I'm with you on that.
But that's not the case with Wolf. So, as we've talked about the film, I don't think we got many questions, did we? We didn't get many questions.
I guess not.
From the internet.
No, just, ones that were probably more jokes than questions. Who was doing the howling and the wolf noises in the final fight?
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this to you. I might have. I know I shared it on Facebook or Twitter. probably last year. But I own a reel of film from Wolf.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
I have my friend Stacy to thank, and she is another enormous Pfeiffer fanatic. And she'd had it for years. Got it from Mike Nichols.
Wow.
In New York, sometime after the movie came out, there was some event. I don't know.
He was giving them away. No, I'm joking.
Well, she has a great story about it, and I can't even do it justice. But basically, he surprised her, I think, by giving it to her.
Yeah.
After they'd had this conversation, and she was donating. I don't know if there was a charity. I forget. Maybe she can chime in when this is posted and share the story. Because the details are slipping my mind right now, but
have her ring the number on the website and leave us a voicemail with the story, and I'll put it on the podcast.
Yeah, that would be great. I'll do that.
347-669-0053. If anyone wants to call in and leave either a Spader, Pfeiffer, or Wolf related thing, I will play it on the podcast. That's 347-669-0053.
Terrific. Yeah, and it's the scene, it's the hotel room scene. He's chained to the radiator.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Have you played it?
No, I haven't. I haven't sequestered, saved.
That's amazing, though. That's fantastic. The only kind of comment we got that's worth reading out is from the wonderful Andy Lunn. And this is what's great about the internet, and also the friends and the fans and the listeners and things that we've made over the last 8 years of doing the website and the show. When we started down the Sleazy Spader route 4 years ago, Andy Lunn, who I think was already a listener to the show, or at least a friend of mine on Facebook, Andy Lunn was like, "Oh my God, I'm so happy you're doing Spader. Me and my wife did our own full Spader Sleazathon viewing some years ago, and I can give you all these." So it's funny that even when you think you've stumbled across like a part of the world that remains undiscovered, that Andy Lunn had been there before us, and God and bless Andy Lunn for that. But he says this, and this will tell you, like, this goes way back with his Spader love. He says, "This one is a special memory for me. The day it was released, we were down at my university town trying to find some digs. We then rushed back up north, which is where he lives in England, so that myself and my old pal could see it that evening. I was a big Nicholson fan back then, still am, but watching it back now, Spader is pretty spectacular in it and more than holds his own against the behemoth that is Jack." And Andy Lund, who is always with us, every time I announce that Sleazy Spader has come around again, he gets all excited. We're so glad that we were doing Wolf this time, and hopefully enjoys this discussion, because I think we've covered this really well, and kind of brought up all the bits and points that need to be talked about, and sung the praises of it as where it needs to be, I think, which I really enjoyed about this conversation. There's nothing left to do then, Michael, other than to put an item, as we always do. I don't know if you've listened to any previous Spader episodes, but we always put an item into James's private Sleazatorium. And what we do is we take something from the film, a prop or an item of clothing or something from the film that Spader will have kept, that he will have put in his Sleazatorium. And the whole point about it is that it is seldom a sleazy thing. He by taking it, or by it appearing in the film at a certain point, it is made sleazy almost by an insidious way, rather than, he doesn't take underwear or a dildo or something, like, or whatever. Like, he doesn't take something obviously sexual or ridiculous. He'll take like a headscarf that someone was wearing, and he'll sniff it repeatedly or something. Like, it'll be something like that. So I was, lots of things have been put in the Sleazy Spadatorium. The Spader Sleazatorium over the 4 years. We have to pick something from Wolf. I think I know what I would like to take. But I will let you go first, Michael, unless you'd like me to go first, and then you'll have more time to think.
Well, I immediately had a thought. I might as well just share it.
Yeah, go right ahead.
The suede shoes.
The urinated on suede shoes.
Yes, they must be urinated on.
Yeah.
This is not pre-urination. Yeah, absolutely.
The post-urinated on suede shoes. Yeah, that would definitely be something that he would have. That would be probably in the sniffatorium section of the Sleazatorium, because he's got to have like a kind of scratch and sniff section of this kind of dungeon museum of his past exploits. So I do like that, the urinated shoe. Either that or to get even more weird, the urination mechanism, like the special bottle or the special tube or whatever it was that Jack was using to do the urination effect. I would imagine he probably took that from the set. I'm going to go even darker and weirder. I think he has, I think from the end of the same scene actually as the urinated shoe, I think he took Nicholson's bloody handkerchief and the 2 rubber bloody fingers that Nicholson finds in his pocket. Is that at the end of the same? That's at the end of the same sequence, right? He pulls those out of his pocket when he goes over to the sink.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, he's in the bathroom.
Oh, by the way, full noting for the fact that Spader never once washes his hands in that scene. But I feel like Spader probably has the 2 rubber fingers and the bloody handkerchief up in his Sleazatorium. And I think he leaves them there in like either on a frame or in a frame on the wall or on like a side table. And yes, on a side table lit by an ever so like low wattage bulb. Like they're not lit so that it's apparent what they are. They're just slightly lit. And when he does take people down to his Sleazatorium, he never mentions the bloody handkerchief and the 2 fingers. He just leaves it there for people to speculate. And if he sees someone eyeing them and he thinks someone's going to go and ask about the bloody fingers and the bloody handkerchief, unless obviously they've seen the movie, unless they go, oh, that's from Wolf, great. Unless if they're about to say, wait a minute, what's that? He changes tack completely and walks over to another side of the basement so that they can't think about them. But that the fingers lie on top of the handkerchief under a low wattage bulb in the corner to freak people out. Not because he's done anything sick with them, although I'm sure he sniffed the fingers. It's Spader. But I think because he likes the people that he gets in his basement to be slightly unnerved and excited almost, and that's what he thinks the fingers and the bloody handkerchief does.
And I think they would. They would to me.
So do you see what I mean now by the Sleazatorium? Like you have
do. Yeah.
No, I mean the peen on shoes is excellent. That's definitely, he would encourage people to smell the shoes.
I was going to say, yes, exactly.
That would definitely be the thing. And he may even, like, as someone comes round to his house, when he opens the door, he's probably cuddling or stroking one of the shoes. And never comments on the stain. Yeah, he's just slowly spreading or to relax himself, he combs the suede all in one direction. You know how suede, like if you move it side by side, it makes a different color. That
could be one of his calming mechanisms.
Yeah, almost like a Reiki thing. He's just combing the suede. I love it. I've got to go back throughout the 4 seasons we've done and put all the Sleazatorium items together because it would make a fascinating.
Compile it. And probably pretty impressive at this point. Or disturbingly impressive.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up. This will be our 15th movie that we've covered. Next week will be the 16th, and there are still plenty more. I have a list. And every year we knock 4 off the list, and there's probably enough for another 5 seasons of this. So
nice.
4 or 5 seasons. So Sleazy Spader doesn't show any sign of abating, much like the man himself. But Mike, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on discussing Wolf this episode. It's been a fantastic conversation. Do you feel that we did everything right and set the record straight on this movie?
I do. I think we got it.
Excellent. Well, look, you're welcome back anytime. Keep writing the fantastic reviews for the website whenever you get an idea. And tell everyone, if you want to be found, where they can find you and your other endeavors online that people should check out.
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Earth2Mike, and it's TWO. That's also my Instagram. And John mentioned the blog earlier, Words Seem Out of Place. And I'm writing at a whole bunch of other places. Currently, obviously contributing to the diner. And I'm currently working on, I've been writing a couple of chapters that are hopefully going to be included in anthologies, published books, which is going to be great.
Nice. Congratulations, man.
Yeah, I'm really psyched. One has been written. Actually, no, 2 have been written. And I think I'll probably just need to do some editing once the editors get back to me. And then a third is hopefully going to be written this year. So, and they're all pop culture focused. And they should be really great books, actually. So, with some really great people and great writers, some friends too, that I'm really excited for these projects. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty much what's happening.
It's funny that a lot of the, despite us apparently living in the technical age and, people complaining that nobody reads anymore and blah, 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 all this other stuff that people talk about, in my generation, you'd be surprised, but a lot of the friends I know, both online and in reality, are actual authors, published authors. What they're looking to do is to be published and have actual physical either books or pamphlets or novellas or whatever it is out there in the world. Jim has done poetry. My friend John Wallace is a published author of sci-fi novels. Andrew Buckley writes young and adult fiction, and now yourself. It's going to be fantastic, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, and I have book ideas, so I'm hoping to get to that point too at some point.
Well, as I say, it's fantastic, and whenever that gets published, dude, you've got to come back on, and we'll, like we've done with other friends of the show, we'll promote, pimp, advertise, and do whatever we can to get people to pick up a copy, because it's all about supporting and sharing indie content these days. There is, as we see with the massive media giants buying each other up every other day, we are going to live in a situation where most of what we watch are controlled by one company. So the only avenue we have to fresh ideas and new content is from indie people putting it out there and doing it themselves the old-fashioned way. So I applaud it, sir, and I wish you all the very best with it.
Thank you.
All right, and with that closes this episode of the After Movie Diner. Don't forget to check us out on Patreon over at patreon.com/After Movie Diner to help support the show. Either that, or if you don't have the money right now, why not just rate, review, share, subscribe, comment, like, retweet, and all those things that take nary a second to do, but mean the world to us. So support the diner in all those many ways, or head over to patreon.com/After Movie Diner. Thanks again to my guest, Michael Campochiaro, and we will be back next week with the 4th and final Sleazy Spader Springtime episode. All right, to play out this show, we are going to listen to a demo that I wrote recently. It is not a finished work, but a demo of a electric guitar song that I've written for an upcoming album. So you might be interested, you might not, but here's the music to play us out this week. best things in life are tactile. The best things in life have texture. From that night in Toronto and the music that breaks you. From a hand in yours to the dust in the shaft of cinema light. From the love of the vintage and a sweat from a fight. Yeah. The best things in life are you. The best things in life are you. Me and her from your eyes as you wake up to the feel of Pfeiffer. From the sound of you singing as you make the tea. Never leave me. Never leave me. No, never leave me. Never leave me. I want that piano. How'd I get that look? I wanna feel that pen. I wanna smell that book. His jacket fits so nice. I wish I lived in that room too. Why you don't realize this? Someone's saying all that about you. They're saying that about you. They're saying that about you. That about you. Someone's saying all that about you. All that about you. Must be something in the water. That undefinable breath. That oxygen in the blood that pushes your finest up. Let's make that night a myth. 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 The best things in life have dignity. The best things in life have peace. From the feeling of true community to a 5 a.m. winter's beach. From the selfless act of dying man to the notes that heal when notes fly free. Never leave me. 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 When you can't say I love you, I love, there's enough. That night with our first kiss, that night when you landed the balloon. Let's make that night a myth. 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 When you can't say I love you, I love this enough. That night with our first kiss, that night when you landed the balloon. Let's make that night a myth. Let's make that night a myth.
it's just so nice. I wish I lived in that room too. What you don't realize is someone saying all that.